Welcome back. We are on day 25 of this war, and today the story shifted from the battlefield to the negotiating table, or more precisely, to the question of whether a negotiating table even exists yet, and who has the credibility and the relationships to build one before the 5-day clock runs out on Saturday. Pakistan stepped forward today and said it is ready to host talks between the United States and Iran in Islamabad. That offer is significant. It is also fragile. And before we assess whether this peace push can work, we need to fact-check the assumptions behind it, because several of the most important premises being presented to the public about this diplomatic moment are contested, incomplete, or simply not supported by the evidence. Let's start with what is actually confirmed about Pakistan's diplomatic role, because there is a difference between what Islamabad is publicly saying and what it has privately been doing. Pakistan's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Tahir Andrabi told Al Jazeera on Tuesday that if the parties desire, Islamabad is always willing to host talks, and that it has consistently advocated for dialogue and diplomacy to promote peace and stability in the region. NBC News hours later, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif wrote publicly that Pakistan stands ready and honored to be the host to facilitate meaningful and conclusive talks for a comprehensive settlement of the ongoing conflict. 2 public statements in a single day. That is not a casual diplomatic signal. That is a coordinated public offer. And the question is not whether Pakistan made the offer. The question is whether the parties it is offering to bring together are actually prepared to sit in the same room. Pakistani Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir spoke to President Trump on Sunday. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif called Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian a day later. This was followed by Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar holding separate calls with his Iranian and Turkish counterparts. NBC News, that sequence of phone calls is the diplomatic architecture being built in real time. Army Chief to Trump on Sunday. Prime Minister to Iranian President on Monday. Foreign Minister to Tehran and Ankara immediately after. That is not a country that woke up Tuesday morning and decided to offer to host talks. That is a country that has been quietly building the framework for exactly this moment across multiple levels of government simultaneously. Now let's address why Pakistan specifically has the credibility to play this role, because the answer contains several facts that most Western media coverage is not presenting clearly. Pakistan is the only Muslim-majority country with nuclear weapons and does not host U.S. military bases. It maintains long-standing ties with Saudi Arabia dating back to 1947, reinforced by a strategic defense pact signed in September 2025. At the same time, it shares a 900-kilometer border with Iran and hosts the world's second-largest Shia Muslim population. NBC News. That combination of characteristics is genuinely unique in the current geopolitical landscape. No U.S. military bases on Pakistani soil means Tehran does not view Islamabad as an American proxy. A nuclear arsenal means both Washington and Tehran treat Pakistani officials as serious strategic interlocutors rather than messengers. A 900-kilometer shared border with Iran and the world's second-largest Shia population means Pakistan has domestic political incentives to maintain functional relationships with Tehran, regardless of American pressure. And the defense pact with Saudi Arabia means the Gulf states view Pakistan as a credible representative of Sunni Muslim geopolitical interests. Pakistan sits at every intersection simultaneously. When Munir visited the White House for an unprecedented lunch meeting with Trump in June 2025, the first time a U.S. president had hosted a Pakistani military chief who was not also president, Trump said publicly that Pakistan knows Iran very well better than most. NBC News Trump said that in June 2025, 8 months before this war began, the relationship between Munir and Trump was not built in response to this crisis. It was built before it. And Pakistan's Foreign Minister Dar revealed something in a parliamentary address that has received almost no attention in Western coverage, and that deserves to be stated clearly. Dar revealed that Pakistan had pushed back against Washington's demand for zero uranium enrichment, instead proposing a monitored framework, saying it was agreed that there should be surveillance of 2 to 3 countries, and Iran was happy with that. NBC News Pakistan did not just carry messages. Pakistan proposed a substantive modification to America's core demand and got Iranian buy-in for an alternative framework. That is not mediation. That is negotiation. And it happened before this war began, which means the foundation for a monitored enrichment compromise was laid months ago by Islamabad. Now, let's fact-check the gap between Trump's characterization of the current diplomatic situation and what the analysts and officials actually say is happening. Trump claimed major points of agreement, almost all points, and described 15 specific areas of convergence. Let's measure that against Iran's publicly stated conditions for ending the war. An Iranian official quoted by state-linked press TV outlined Tehran's conditions for ending the war, including guarantees against future military action, closure of all U.S. military bases in the Gulf region, full reparations from Washington and Tel Aviv, an end to regional conflicts involving Iran-aligned groups, and a new legal framework governing the Strait of Hormuz. NBC News, closure of all U.S. military bases in the Gulf, full reparations, a new legal framework for Hormuz. Those are not conditions that America can agree to in a 5-day window. The United States has 5 major military installations across the Gulf: Al Udeid in Qatar, Al Dhafra in the UAE, Ali Al Salam in Kuwait, NSA Bahrain, and Prince Sultan in Saudi Arabia. Closing all of them is not a negotiating concession. It is a complete withdrawal of American military presence from the region. That is not a condition America has ever come close to accepting in any negotiation in modern history. Mehran Kamrava, director of the Iranian Studies Unit at Georgetown University in Qatar, said Trump's approach followed a familiar pattern and argued Washington has relied on sustained military and economic pressure to force Tehran to negotiate on U.S. terms, a strategy that has yet to succeed, saying this is consistent with Trump's resort to gunboat diplomacy and his assumption that he can continue to pressure and threaten Iranians into negotiating. We have seen, however, that there has been resistance to this sort of pressure tactic by the Iranian side, and that the Iranians have not responded to threats the way the Americans have anticipated. NBC News has yet to succeed. The academic at Georgetown, running the Iranian Studies Unit, is describing 25 days of the most intensive American military campaign since Iraq as a strategy that has not worked. That is the view from the scholarship. Now measure it against the economic reality. Trita Parsi, executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, argued that the war had paradoxically strengthened Iran's position on the key issue of sanctions, saying the reality is that the war has provided Iran with de facto sanctions relief and that Iran is exporting more oil now than before the war, at twice the price, referring to the Trump administration's decision to lift sanctions on Iranian oil already on boats out at sea, adding that Iran has leverage and it will not agree to end the war without formalizing sanctions relief. NBC News. Iran is exporting more oil now than before the war, at twice the price, because America lifted sanctions on Iranian oil to manage the energy crisis caused by the war against Iran. That is the strategic irony that no press conference has acknowledged directly. The war that was supposed to economically cripple Iran has accidentally given Iran de facto sanctions relief and doubled its oil revenue. And Iran's condition for ending the war includes formalizing that sanctions relief permanently, which is precisely what Washington went to war to prevent. Kamrava identified Israel as a central obstacle, saying Israel does not want an end to the war and does not want the U.S. to negotiate with Iran directly or through intermediaries like Pakistan, and that the GCC and the U.S. want the war to end and end soon. NBC News. The GCC wants the war to end. America wants the war to end. And the country that started this war jointly with America does not want it to end. That is the fundamental alliance fracture that Pakistan's mediation effort is trying to navigate around. Every time diplomacy gets close, Israel has the capacity to act as a spoiler by conducting strikes that provoke Iranian retaliation, by targeting Iranian figures whose deaths trigger new waves of missiles, by striking energy infrastructure that Trump has explicitly asked them to stop hitting. Netanyahu made clear on Monday that Israeli strikes in Iran will continue regardless of any American diplomatic pause. 2 possible formats are under discussion for a meeting in Islamabad. One involves Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Another envisions U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance meeting Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who has dismissed Trump's claims of talks as an attempt to escape the quagmire in which the U.S. and Israel are trapped. NBC News, J.D. Vance, and Ghalibaf in the same room in Islamabad. That would be the highest level direct contact between American and Iranian officials since before the 1979 revolution. But Ghalibaf is the same man who publicly called Trump's claims of productive conversations fake news used to manipulate oil markets. Sitting across a table from the administration, whose claims you just publicly dismissed as market manipulation, requires a significant shift in public positioning that neither side has yet made. The structural obstacles to this peace push working within the 5-day window are specific and documentable. First, Iran's publicly stated conditions, base closures, reparations, new Hormuz legal framework, are maximalist opening positions that no American administration could accept without congressional authorization. Second, Israel has explicitly stated it will continue strikes regardless of American diplomatic pauses, meaning any Iranian concession risks being rendered meaningless by an Israeli strike that triggers new retaliation waves. Third, Parsi said, it does not appear that the conflict is quite yet ripe for mediation, but that it is important to begin the diplomacy before the moment of ripeness has arrived. NBC News. Not quite yet ripe for mediation. That is the assessment of the executive vice president of the Quincy Institute. Not a hawkish think tank, but an organization dedicated to restraint and diplomacy. Even the analysts who most want this war to end are not confident the moment has arrived. What Pakistan represents in this moment is not a solution. It is a container, a trusted physical and diplomatic space where the first genuine direct contact between American and Iranian officials might happen without either side having to publicly concede they are negotiating. The Pentagon accelerated deployments to the Gulf with the USS Boxer Amphibious Ready Group, and the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit moved from California 3 weeks before schedule. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit on board the USS Tripoli is already en route from Japan. The U.S. is also weighing options, including seizing Kharg Island, which handles about 90% of Iran's crude exports, and sending ground forces to secure Tehran's enriched uranium stockpiles. NBC News. The Marines are moving faster. Kharg Island seizure is under active consideration. Ground troops in Iran are being planned. That is America continuing to build military pressure at the exact moment it is asking Pakistan to set up a diplomatic table. That is either a negotiating strategy, maximize military pressure to force better terms, or it is two separate tracks of American policy running in parallel without coordination. Former Pakistani diplomat Khalid Massoud said it directly. The U.S. is still moving the Marines, which signals that if the talks do not work out, it could lead to something. Here is where the facts leave us on day 25. Pakistan has formally offered to host talks in Islamabad. 2 formats are under discussion. The army chief spoke to Trump on Sunday. The prime minister spoke to Iran's president on Monday. Pakistan previously proposed a monitored enrichment framework that Iran accepted before this war began. Iran's publicly stated conditions include base closures and reparations that America cannot accept. Israel will continue striking regardless of any pause. The IEA chief says this is worse than 1973 and 1979 combined. Marines are accelerating toward the Gulf 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Kharg Island seizure is under active consideration. The 5-day window ends Saturday. And the most honest assessment from the most credible diplomatic analysts says the conflict is not quite yet ripe for mediation, but that someone has to start building the table before the moment arrives. Pakistan is building the table. Whether anyone sits down at it before Saturday is the most important question in the world right now. We will keep watching every hour. We will keep verifying every claim. Stay with us.